11 July 1302, a marshy field near Kortrijk in the county of Flanders. On one side, glittering steel, several thousand French knights and squires, the very flower of Europe's military elite. On the other, a mass of craftsmen and townsmen packed into a solid wall of pikes and heavy spiked clubs they call the goedendag. 3 hours after the battle begins, the ground near Kortrijk will be covered with the bodies of more than 1,000 French horsemen and dozens of high-born lords, and Flemish craftsmen will hang hundreds of golden spurs in the town church as trophies. This is the story of how, in one summer day, the right to wage war passes from the aristocracy to the lower orders. Imagine you are a French knight. Your whole life is training in the saddle, tournaments, a code of honor. Since childhood you've been told one heavily armored horseman is worth 10 men on foot. And now you're looking at the Flemish army. Almost no cavalry, only infantry in simple armor, guild banners, crude pikes. On paper, this is not a battle. It's a punishment. You expect an easy rout of the rabble, then a feast and ransom money. But by evening, the knights will be lying face down in sticky Flemish mud, and the townsmen will stop being afraid of men in gold and steel forever. The main lesson of this battle is simple and brutal. At Kortrijk, the monopoly of knightly cavalry on war dies. Here, for the first time so clearly, you can see that disciplined, well-trained infantry of townsmen and peasants can grind down the flower of chivalry if it uses terrain, formation, and cold calculation. The French commanders treat this campaign as a routine punitive expedition, but in the end, they give Europe a lesson that will be repeated a century later at Bannockburn, Crécy, and Agincourt, and every time the blow will land in the same place, on knightly arrogance. To understand why everything comes down to this field, you have to rewind the tape a few years back. Flanders is not some wild frontier, but one of the economic engines of Europe. Cities like Bruges and Ghent live off English wool, looms, and sea trade. Formally, the county is a vassal of France, but in practice it is used to broad autonomy. Rich cities bargain with their counts on equal terms. When Philip the Fair comes to the French throne, he sees Flanders not as a partner, but as an undertaxed purse and an awkward neighbor that ought to be crushed and turned into a normal province of the royal domain. Count Guy of Dampierre, an aging Flemish lord, tries to maneuver, sometimes relying on the cities, sometimes seeking an alliance with the English against Paris. For Philip, this is a direct challenge. In 1297, the Franco-Flemish War begins. The French army invades the county, smashes resistance, Guy ends up in captivity, and Flanders is effectively occupied. French garrisons and officials are placed in the cities, and in Bruges, the king's lieutenant Jacques de Châtillon is put in charge of the administration. On paper, order is restored, but under this lid, hatred is already boiling, especially among the guild lions, supporters of independence, who watch the lilies, the local pro-French elites, grow rich by cooperating with the conqueror. The explosion comes in May 1302. After a series of humiliations and rumors of upcoming reprisals, Flemish exiles and the city militia return to Bruges on the night that will later be called the Bruges Matins. Men with goedendags move through the streets, burst into houses where the French and their supporters are quartered, and cut them down in their sleep. To tell locals from outsiders, the rebels, according to the chroniclers, force people to say the phrase "Schild on Vriend." A French tongue stumbles over the Flemish sounds, and that slip costs many their lives. By morning, the garrison is almost wiped out, and Châtillon himself barely escapes disguised as a priest. He rides to Paris with one piece of news: Flanders has risen. Philip the Fair's response is predictable and symbolic. He gathers not just an army, but a display of royal might. About 8,000 men, including up to 2,500 or 3,000 heavy horsemen, knights and squires, formed into dozens of lances under the banners of the greatest French families. The infantry includes crossbowmen, spearmen, light troops. But in the eyes of the French nobility, all of this is just support for the main instrument of war, the cavalry. Command goes to Count Robert II of Artois, an experienced aristocrat who is sure he is not going to war at all, but to a demonstrative execution of rebellious craftsmen. The Flemish camp is a different universe. The Count is in captivity. Most of the nobility is either passive or on the French side. The core of the army consists of city militias, Bruges, Ypres, the rural communities of Western Flanders. They are assembled under the banners of guilds and communes led by allies of the Dampierre house, Guy and John of Namur, the Count's grandson William of Jülich, as well as city leaders like Peter de Koninck and Jan Borluut. The Flemings have almost no cavalry, but they do have something the French don't consider a serious weapon: thick ranks of spearmen and masses of men with goedendags, heavy wooden staves with iron spikes, designed to drive steel into the gaps of a knight's armor. The Flemings' OP build is not so much the weapon as the combination of discipline, formation, and the armor of ordinary men. The city militias have been training ahead of time. They've been going on campaign for more than a year. Many own mail shirts, or at least a helmet, a gorget, iron gloves. They know how to hold the line under blows, how to use spear and goedendag in a tight mass. French chroniclers will later bitterly write that their chivalry died at the hands of weavers and cloth finishers, but these weavers stand in line like a living wall and have no intention of running at the sight of gilded shields. The tragic blindness of the French lies in their belief that none of this matters. In the military theory of their time, 1 knight equals 10 footmen, and a cavalry charge is a universal key to victory. With plenty of experience fighting ordinary feudal infantry, with crusades behind them, French commanders do not see in the Flemings a qualitatively new threat. For them, the city militias are a noisy mob that will scatter at the first serious impact from armored horsemen. That conviction will let them, on the day of battle, make a whole chain of decisions that turn the Flemish field into a mass grave for the flower of chivalry. The Flemings understand that on open ground they'll be swept away. So when, at the end of June, they gather near Kortrijk and block the local castle with its French garrison, this is not just a siege. They are deliberately preparing for a field battle. The site is chosen carefully. In front of the town lies a plain cut by ditches, streams, and hollows. Some are natural channels of the River Lys, others are dug by hand and camouflaged with branches and turf. The marshy soil can support infantry, but hinders the charge of heavy horses. The Flemings check the depth of fords, mark dangerous spots, and place their ranks so that the French will have to attack across water and ruts, losing their formation. Imagine you're standing in that Flemish column. In front of you is the Groninger brook, with wet grass along its banks and hooves sinking into the soft ground. Behind you is a bend of the river covering your rear. To your left, the town and the walls with the castle not yet taken. To your right, an open flank, but guarded by ditches. The commanders explain. We don't advance, we wait. Our job is to stand, to keep the pikes planted in the ground, the goedendags raised until the knights impale themselves on this forest of iron. That is the trap, to force the French to play their familiar game of frontal cavalry charge, but on a field that kills cavalry. The French camp sees something very different. In front of them is a relatively narrow Flemish front, with the town and the river behind it. Given their numerical superiority in cavalry, the task seems ideal. Smash the wall of infantry, drive them into the water and butcher them. Advice to use infantry and crossbowmen properly, to feel out the flanks, to cross the streams in separate groups is drowned out by the knight's certainty that honor demands a straight charge. At the war council, Robert of Artois practically ignores the danger posed by the terrain. After all, his horses and men are well trained, so they'll get through. The battle begins with the French still trying to fight by the book. Up to 1,000 crossbowmen move forward, some French, some hired from Italy and Spain. Opposite them are about 900 Flemish archers and crossbowmen. A skirmish breaks out. The Flemings are pushed back, their arrows barely scratch the thick armor of the leading knights, and French bolts start to reach the first ranks of the infantry wall. but the effectiveness of this fire is low. Dense formation, shields, mail shirts, and the ditches in front of the Flemings make hits rare. The knights get bored. This is not the kind of war they came for. Robert of Artois watches this and worries less about the Flemings than about his own infantry. If he now throws the heavy cavalry forward, it will crash into the streams and then into a solid mass of armed townsmen. The foot soldiers at the front will end up between two fires and will simply die. To free space for the charge, Robert gives a fatal order: pull the infantry back and clear the field for the knights. From that moment on, all he really has is several thousand mounted men in heavy armor who must, in a narrow corridor, cross streams, boggy ground, and an unknown number of camouflaged ditches. Some of his own infantry will die simply because they end up under their comrades' hooves. Imagine you're a French infantryman at that moment. Just now you were marching forward, shooting across the brook, and now you see a landslide of your own knights thundering straight at you. Hooves, banners, shouts of "Forward!" You have one task: get out of their way in time. Some manage it, others slip in the mud and go down under the horses, breaking their legs and wrecking the formation even more. The cavalry still fords the streams. Some riders topple straight into the water. The heavy armored horses bog down in the soft soil, but the mass keeps moving. Ahead is the Flemish wall. Beyond it, supposedly easy prey and the honor of France. When the first heavy impact slams into the Flemish front, the noise is such that the chroniclers hardly need to exaggerate. Horses scream, steel crashes, the wounded howl, lances shatter. But the key thing is what the French did not expect. The wall does not move. The pikes are dug into the ground at an angle. Riders' and horses' chests impale themselves on them and fall forward, and in that moment the goedendags go to work. Their long, thick shafts and sharp spikes are literally hammered into the gaps between armor plates, into necks, armpits. Where a few manage to break through the line, they are met by second and third ranks of Flemings. There is no space for speed or maneuver, and the knight turns from a tank into a heavy, slow target. The first French wave chokes, but Robert of Artois still has reserves. He throws the second line into the attack and leads it forward himself. In theory, his rear should support this push. 700 heavily armored horsemen in the rear guard. But while Robert and the foremost nobles spur ahead, the rear units start thinking about other things. The baggage, their own safety. Instead of following their commander into a deadly meat grinder, part of the rear guard turns back to cover the wagons. As a result, the Count of Artois, the marshals of France, and many high lords find themselves in the front ranks of the charge without real support. The Flemings surround them like hunters closing in on a wounded beast. In the very thick of the fighting, a scene unfolds that will be retold and romanticized for centuries. Brother Willem van Seftinghe, a lay brother from a nearby monastery fighting in the Flemish ranks, allegedly hamstrings Robert of Artois' horse with his spear. The Count falls, surrounded by enemies, keeps fighting on foot and takes blow after blow. Some stories say he begs for mercy, others that he pleads for his horse's life, trusting in the knightly code. In reply, later chroniclers claim, the Flemings laugh and say they don't understand French. It's symbolic. For men whose lives were never protected by that code, there is no reason to play by chivalric rules. To them, this is not a noble opponent, but a man who came to burn their towns. Robert dies. The commander's death breaks the French army psychologically. Those still in the saddle see banners fall, marshals of France lying in the mud, Flemish infantry swarming around, chopping at their horses' legs. The attempt by the Kortrijk castle garrison to sally out and strike the Flemings from the rear ends in an ambush. Prepared militia units intercept them and drive them back inside. The remnants of the French infantry, pulled back earlier, now stand off to the side, without cavalry, without leadership. When word reaches them of the nobles' deaths and the collapse of the attack, they do what most medieval infantry do in such a moment. They abandon their positions and run. For the Flemings, from this point on, it's no longer a battle, it's a hunt. They have been warned in advance. Today there will be no prisoners. That breaks every usual rule. A captured knight can be turned into a ransom fortune. But 2 years of occupation and the brutality of French garrisons have built up so much hatred that now the Flemish commanders deliberately give up money for the sake of terror. Fleeing knights bog down in ditches and swampy hollows, lose their horses, and their heavy armor drags them down. Infantrymen with goedendags catch up and finish them. Some estimates say that more than 1,000 French horsemen and up to 75 high-ranking nobles die that day. Flemish losses are put anywhere from 100 to a few hundred. Even cautious figures show a monstrous imbalance. By next morning, the field near Kortrijk looks like the end of the world. Bloated horse carcasses, twisted metal, earth churned by hooves, ditches packed so tightly with corpses that the water no longer flows. The Flemings walk over this carpet of steel and flesh, and do the thing that will give the battle its name. They strip the spurs from the dead knights. Most are ordinary, but many are richly decorated, gilded tournament prizes. Around 500 pairs of spurs, according to the chronicles, are carried to the Church of Our Lady in Kortrijk and hung up as trophies. For ordinary townsmen and craftsmen, this is not mere decoration. It is material proof that the flower of chivalry can be cut down if it comes to you as an occupier. The political consequences are felt almost immediately. The castle at Kortrijk surrenders after 2 days. In Ghent and Ypres, the pro-French patrician regimes are swept away. In their place, guild leaders, the same men whose people just stood in a wall against the knights, tighten their grip on city councils. For a while, Flanders looks genuinely free. The French army is shattered, the crown's prestige shaken. The Pope, according to contemporaries, reads the reports in horror. The victory of rabble over chivalry seems like a violation of the established divine order. But the strategic pendulum will swing back. 2 years later, the French fleet crushes the Flemings at Zierikzee, and in 1304 the royal army takes its revenge at Mons-en-Pévèle. The Peace of 1305 is again harsh on Flanders, tribute, concessions, restrictions, and yet Kortrijk will remain in history not as an episode in a lost war, but as the beginning of an infantry revolution. Later military theorists will see in this battle the prototype of many 14th and 15th century clashes where organized infantry breaks attacking cavalry. Bannockburn, where the Scots stand against the English, Crécy and Agincourt with their English longbowmen and footmen, the victories of Swiss pikemen, the wagon forts of the Hussites. After Kortrijk, more and more rulers realize that relying solely on expensive knights is a road to catastrophe. The nobility gradually climbs down from their horses and fights on foot, and towns and rural communities understand. If they are organized and trained, they themselves become a force. 500 years after the battle, the romantics of the 19th century will turn it into the myth of the Lion of Flanders. Painters will create huge canvases of the falling Count of Artois. The writer Hendrik Conscience will publish the novel The Lion of Flanders, on which a whole generation will grow up. In the 20th century, Flemish nationalists will take 11th July as their community's holiday, and the Spurs will become a symbol not only of military, but also of cultural emancipation. Yet the real story is more complicated. In the Flemish ranks of 1302, there are French-speaking nobles, mercenaries, and ordinary people who don't care what language their lord swears in. What matters is who collects the taxes and who tramples their land. If you strip away all the later myths, one hard lesson remains, the one that makes Kortrijk resemble many other turning-point battles of the Middle Ages. Technology without brains is nothing. Heavy cavalry, the best armor and noble birth do not save you if your commanders despise the enemy and ignore the terrain. The mass of ordinary people stops being background and, for the first time on this scale, becomes the decisive factor on the battlefield. That day at Kortrijk, not only a particular French army dies, the illusion dies that war is an endless tournament for the chosen few. From then on, every knight spurring into a charge knows, somewhere deep inside, that ahead there may be not glory, but a ditch filled with water and mud, and a peasant with a heavy staff and an iron spike.